And
we're now recording.
All right, welcome everyone. I'm Andrea Baer, and you have joined the ACRL SLILC Open Educational Practices Showcase, and I am going to share my screen. I've just got some short slides for you all. I think here we are. Okay. All right, hope everybody can see that. So this event has been organized by the ACRL Student Learning and Information Literacy Committee, and more specifically by the Open Education and Professional Development team. And you will see that there is also a LibGuide. Susanna, would you mind grabbing the link for that and putting that in the chat for us? Thanks so much. So Susanna is also on that committee, and she is putting that link to the event LibGuide into the chat. So if you would like to see the presentation slides for today, those will be available there, as well as descriptions of all of the presentations for today. So who are we? This is the SLILC Open Educational and Professional Development team members are listed here. So I'm Andrea Baer, helping to coordinate that team this year. And then joined with me is Susanna Eng-Ziskin, who is also going to help. Did I mispronounce her name? Susanna? Okay. Who is also going to help in moderating today's session. And we have our other group members who have helped to organize this year's events as well. Joe Askins, Kyle Benaxis, Mo Chakrabarty, and LaMonica Stanford, Rhonda Hoisman, and Lindy Matz-Bidson. But the main stars of today are our presenters. We have 3 presentations from people at different institutions who are working on open educational practices in different ways. So first we will have a presentation. Each of these presentations will be about 10 to 12 minutes, and then that'll be followed by a Q&A session. We'll start with open textbook writing as a tool of instruction and information literacy courses. That'll be with Yang Wu, Anne Grant, and Megan Palmer at Clemson Libraries. And then we'll have Wiki Edu, an open educational practice overload, question mark. That'll be by Brandon Adler at University of New Orleans. And then finally, we will have the presentation OEP Collaborations and Open Pedagogy Project Roadmap, Considerations for Planning, Implementing, Sharing, and Sustaining Open Pedagogy Projects with Bryan, McGeary, and Christina Riehman-Murphy. All right. We wanted to give you a very brief definition of open educational practices. Just to make sure that we're all on the same page. Of course, each of our presenters will be talking in more depth about what open educational practices look like in their particular contexts. But this definition from Cronin in 2017 is, I think, a useful starting point. They define it as, quote, collaborative practices that include the creation, use, and reuse of OER, as well as pedagogical practices employing participatory technologies and social networks for interaction, peer learning, knowledge creation, and empowerment of learners. So as we can see here, this is a lot about openness as a concept, as a philosophy, and engaging students in this practice of openness on many levels, sharing information, collaborating, and sometimes that involves using technologies or resources, but it also extends beyond those technologies and resources. Okay, with that, I'm going to turn it over to our presenters. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And we will move to our first presentation, which is going to be with Yang Wu, Anne Grant, and Megan Palmer at Clemson Libraries, presenting on open textbook writing as a tool of instruction and information literacy courses.
And as they put their slides up, I'm just going to briefly introduce our presenters. I'm also the timekeeper and will be the person who potentially rudely interrupts them to let them know how much time they have left. So for our first presentation, our presenters are Yang Wu. Yang is the Open Resources Librarian at Clemson University, South Carolina, and a specialist in open education. He's the chair-elect of Pascal, the South Carolina Academic Library Consortium's Affordable Learning Committee, and the contributing blog editor for the International Journal of Open Educational Resources. Anne Grant has served as the instruction coordinator at Clemson Libraries for the past 12 years. She also serves as the History and Geography Research Librarian and is currently pursuing her PhD in Learning Sciences at Clemson University with a specialized interest in student-generated content. Megan Palmer is the Assessment Librarian at Clemson University. She's the current president of the South Carolina Library Association. All right, take it away.
Thank you very much. So hi, everyone. We'd like to introduce to you open textbook writing. And by that, we mean the practice of having students collectively write, edit, and publish an online openly licensed textbook, or an OER. This activity uses web publishing as a tool of information literacy teaching, and it is an alternative approach to big class projects or class assignments, such as a term paper. And we want to introduce this as a creative solution to this larger development in higher education, the infusing of information literacy into general education courses. Institutions of higher education are increasingly appreciating the importance of information literacy. They're either offering, as part of their general education programs, specialized semester-long courses on information literacy, or they're offering courses that have a strong information literacy component infused into them. And one example of this latter case is STS 1010, Science and Technology in Society. This course has been taught for a long time. It is looking at the relationship between science, technology, and social change. But at Clemson and at many other institutions, it's increasingly acquired a very strong information literacy component. It's mainly a course that challenges students at a lower level, particularly freshmen and sophomores, with identifying authoritative sources, developing research and information search skills, conducting literature reviews, and also building a critical argument. Now, these courses are increasingly taught by librarians, and they offer librarians many benefits. One of these is to engage students in further information literacy training beyond that 1 or 2 shot lesson. And it also gives librarians the opportunity to help students develop skills beyond basic information literacy skills, such as research, evaluation of sources. It's also a way to get them to think about and to critically analyze how information is created and disseminated in the world. And most of all, being semester long, these courses offer librarians greater creativity and flexibility in instructional practices. But these courses also come with challenges. One is, now you've got to integrate information literacy into a semester long course. You also have to balance, such as the case of STS 1010, the original course objectives with information literacy. And there's others. Anne, can you explain?
Sure. So when you think about maintaining student engagement and motivation, any of us who have taught a session on library skills or information skills know that students have very high self-efficacy, they have very high confidence, but not always high performance. So you always have to take that into account as you consider creating assignments that revolve around information literacy. And also teaching this group of students, these Gen Z students, they have been known to have low attention span. They want passion and purpose in their learning. They prefer to learn as a group in most cases, and they want trust, emotional support, and care from their instruction. So coming up with a balance for all this is definitely a challenge.
So we've applied open textbook writing as a solution, but why did we do this? Well, there's many good reasons. One is that it's fun. It's a collaborative activity that's very engaging, and it's particularly motivating to Gen Z students who want to work as a group and learn as a group. Number two is that it's an assignment that can be semester long and help reinforce gradually information literacy concepts. It's also a way for information literacy to connect with this course subject, since students are often called to write a open textbook on that specific course subject. And lastly, as we will show, it's something that's really adaptable to many learning modes, such as online learning. So here's how we applied open textbook writing to our STS 1010 course. Anne, can you explain?
Sure. So when you're teaching something in this way, it's very different from what students are used to. You really have to scaffold in all of these skills and assignments. So first, we asked students to choose a topic based on the themes of the course. As you'll see with our textbooks, they were a little different in our approaches. But once they get the approval from the instructor, they start to look for their sources. So in a first draft of an annotated bibliography, which we're all very familiar with, the peers review, and so do the instructor, the sources that they've chosen and how they've chosen to annotate. And again, a lot of structure is given for this. Then, based on that feedback, we ask students to create a second draft of their bibliography. Again, peer and instructor review. And then we get students to write, now get this, the questions that they would ask at the end of their chapter. They don't start writing their chapter yet. They're framing it around some questions that they want other students to get out of their writing. So then based off of all of that, with more peer feedback, we ask them to write the first draft of their chapters and to submit them through the learning management system with more peer feedback and instructor grading. And then finally, they write a second draft for web publication. So lots of iterative work. So the training that they receive in doing this is, number one, they learn how to write for a public audience. They're used to writing for their professor, but now they're writing for their peers. So they have to think a little bit differently about how they would organize their writing to engage readers. They also have to think about copyright. They have to find images and videos that can be used legally. They have to learn concepts like copyright, public domain, open licenses, a lot of things they haven't thought about before. They also have to learn about publishing platforms. They've probably all tweeted or Facebooked, but to combine the word processing and the social media is really kind of an interesting concept because this information is going to be publicly available. And finally, they learn editing skills. They're not just writing a standalone essay, they're writing an essay as a part of a larger project so that it has to look and feel similar to the other pieces. So they have to learn about peer review and style sheets and things like that.
And concepts in the ACRL framework are built into this assignment. Students are not just writing for their instructor and being evaluated only by their instructor. So they're in fact being evaluated by the instructor and their peers. So this really challenges students to think about how authority is constructed and how they can be an authority and how to write in an authoritative way. Also, students have to write this book through a long step of peer review and multiple processes. So, and through this, they learn that producing information is a process of constant refinements. We challenge students to really look for a variety of sources, primary, secondary, and also things such as videos, images, and any other things from the web that are interesting. But they have to be Creative Commons or public domain videos or other things that are copyright safe. So, and students also have to think about copyright issues and how they want to license their work. So through exploring copyright law, students are taught that information really has value and that information is really regulated by a system. And students also learn research as an inquiry because we challenge them to constantly refine their topics and to also integrate theoretical concepts related to the course into their writing. And the whole process of students developing their projects is also engaging them in scholarship as a conversation. We challenge students to write about subjects that they feel they relate to or is connected to their lives. And we also group students together, such as if they all want to do one larger topic, we get them to work together and to really define topics that are distinct from each other. And this is a process of engaging them in making them realize that scholarship is a conversation. And lastly, since they're required to look for a lot of different types of materials online, and that's materials that are copyright safe, they learn to refine their search skills, and they learn that searching is a strategic exploration in a much more thorough way. And we've applied it to many types of teaching. So Megan, can you take it away?
Sure. So this course is traditionally taught face-to-face, but the pandemic forced it to go online, which was challenging. We decided not to require our students to keep their cameras on during class time because we wanted to protect students that might not want their background on display. So we ended up having a lot of students that were engaged and motivated, but not everybody was. So to combat this, we engaged students by incorporating games into class time and facilitating discussions and group work.
Thank you. And here's some examples of works. Can you explain your work, Anne?
Yeah, so you guys will be able to get to the example. Now, don't judge it yet because it's still a work in progress. This is a book that students have started and are continually refining and adding to. So the idea is that eventually we will get to a place where students have a textbook that they feel represents their experience with science, technology, and society.
Thank you, Anne. And in Megan and I's case, what we did is we got students in the fall of 2020 to write about something that really affects them and everybody, COVID-19. They wrote chapters, but they also collectively designed a lot of other things, such as the cover of the book. So what do students think about these things? Megan, can you explain?
So Anne polled her class to see how students felt about textbook creation, and most agreed that it promoted collaborative learning. Yang and I took a different approach. We gave our students a reflective assignment about the class, and we just kind of wanted to hear students' thoughts about the project and kind of how the course went. And it ended up that most of our students enjoyed being a creator and building a tangible project.
And thank you, Megan. So
I'm going to interrupt here now. We are 12 minutes, unfortunately, are up. I know that went really fast. What I want to first of all, I want to thank you for the panelists, and I want to remind our attendees, yes, many claps for our panelists. I'm going to remind our attendees, and I'm going to put it in the chat again, that there's a link to the slides that our presenters showed on our LibGuide. So I'll put that in there so you'll be able to take it. Plus, we were remiss to say that if you have any other questions for any of our three presenters from our three presentations today, you can put them in the chat, and Andrea and I are monitoring that for our question and answer session after that. So again, thank you so much to our first presenters, professors also, I suppose, but presenters. We're going to now move on to our second presentation. This one, our presenter is Brandon Adler. Brandon is the head of library services and information literacy librarian at the University of New Orleans. She also serves on the Justice PhD program faculty advisory board and teaches a required 3-credit course in the interdisciplinary department titled Information Literacy and Scholarly Discourse. Brandon, it's all you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So I am going to talk quickly today about Wiki EDU, and is it an open educational practice overload? But first, let's look at a little bit of, excuse me, A little bit of Wiki Education program background. So Wiki Education serves as the bridge between academia and Wikipedia. It's a small 501c3 nonprofit that seeks to build connections between universities and Wikipedia, as well as other Wikimedia projects in the United States and Canada. Since about 2010, university instructors participating in the program have been able to assign their students to add content to course-related articles on Wikipedia. So essentially what happens is the faculty assign students to edit Wikipedia articles that are related to course topics that close content gaps in academic areas, but also in gender and minority topical areas. Interestingly, in the fall of 2016, which is when their last outcomes study was done, it was found that Wikipedia Education was supporting more than 6,000 students and more than 270 courses. So this sounds great, but what are the disadvantages? Why are we here? Well, I think in order to understand where I'm coming from and my concerns, we need to look at my class structure. My Information Literacy and Scholarly Discourse is a 3-credit course in the Interdisciplinary Studies department, and it's a required course for all interdisciplinary studies students. But the first thing that comes with my course is a 16-page syllabus. So this syllabus contains every little thing that we will do for the semester. This being the introduction to the course, I think the overload, or maybe overwhelm, begins. That said, though, the syllabus is really there to give students an idea of exactly what they will be working on from week to week. So they get to see that they're going to cover the entire research process, the whole journey, and that they're going to use the ACRL framework threshold concepts as guiding points throughout the semester and connecting points to Wikipedia. So in order to really incorporate the research process into the Wikipedia assignment, I have to create assignments that exist outside of the Wikipedia platform. It's just necessary. For example, I need to know that students know how and can illustrate how to write a research question, how to analyze web pages for authority, search for peer-reviewed sources, and to tell me how and why it's relevant to their research. So I assign things like a CRAP test activity, an annotated bibliography, a research organizational plan, and even a short analysis paper. But every single one of these assignments is centered on the article topic that they will be editing in Wikipedia. So it all relates back. The Wiki project, though, this is where my concerns come in, it has its own homework. So what happens when students sign up for this course is we get our own Wiki EDU course page. And every single week they have between 1 and 4 readings, exercises, training modules, and training modules to complete. Plus, there are discussion boards, which I end up dropping into Moodle, and the students have to complete for a grade. So the question then becomes, is the homework in my class hindering equity and even understanding of the framework itself? I ask this question because one of the primary tenets of open educational practices and resources in general is to bring equity to the access of information. So my central question again then becomes, does all the Wikipedia-centric homework that I assign in my course actually overload students so much as to inhibit equity in the classroom? But to really get an idea or even start on answering that question, I started looking at the effectiveness of homework and research around that. Most of the studies completed on the effectiveness of homework really primarily look at K through 12 homework effectiveness. However, I believe that the findings in many cases certainly directly correlate to higher education, since our students come from K through 12 before they enter into their college experience. The skills that they learn during that time are directly correlative to what they bring into introductory courses in higher education. Often, those same challenges are faced by students in poverty, students in minority and underrepresented areas, no matter the level of educational institution in which they're enrolled. So some of the barriers to homework completion then are things like food insecurity. They're more likely to live in a crowded home in order to afford to live there. So they're heavily distracted, higher rates of absence or tardiness because maybe they're taking care of family or they're the primary breadwinner, they have dependents, especially during COVID, taking care of family. So is the Wiki project homework load further contributing to inequities? I say in short, and in my opinion, no. What some research seems to suggest is that it's not necessarily the amount of homework that is assigned, but the way in which the homework is graded that contributes to continued inequities, which I'm definitely going to talk about more in a moment. But in a similar vein, I want to mention first generation students. First generation college students, many of whom are coming from these categories that I spoke of before, poverty, underrepresented, and they face these same issues. And there was a study in 2020 done by Lee McCallan and Helen Johnson. And they highlight that courses and faculty that are perceived by first generation students as having a significant impact in their college experience were those that played a pivotal role in conveying not only encouragement to the students, but the navigational and intellectual skills and resources to succeed beyond that classroom and succeed in the institution as a whole. So as long as faculty were teaching the skills needed to be successful in college, students were deeming them to be effective. With that said, I think it's important now that we look at the advantages of Wikipedia, of Wiki EDU, because I really think that they outweigh the disadvantages. For the instructor, in short, it's instructional design, assistance, guided lesson plans, support staff, and consultation services. For the student, it's numerous. Students gain key 21st century skills like information, digital, and media literacy skills, writing and research development, and critical thinking. While content gaps on Wikipedia do get filled in by students, it gives them the ability to write for a public audience, similar to the previous presentation. It also employs collaboration skills and increased motivation to work on the assignment because they're participating in a global conversation about the topic within a global community. Okay, so what are the arguments for Wikipedia supporting equity? Well, if it doesn't hinder classroom equity, how does it help? Wiki EDU is a completely free and open platform for the students who are participating. In order to participate, though, the instructors must apply and have their class accepted for whichever respective semester. The deadline for fall is coming up June 20th. Once they're accepted, the instructors have access to all of the things on the previous slide: instructional design assistance, guided lesson plans. But most importantly, the students now have this opportunity to build important skills, such as information literacy skills, critical research skills, collaboration, and so on. But in addition to the Wikipedia training modules, Wikipedia contains specific lessons and readings that are particular to their platform, but they cover important topics that transcend that platform, such as copyright and plagiarism, and the importance of authoritative and peer-reviewed sources. And then I pair this with my own readings, own assigned readings, but staying true to open educational practices and resources, I do not require students to purchase any textbooks whatsoever. Any and all readings that I assign are provided by me via PDF, or they're freely available on the internet. But that gets me to the third topic, which I briefly touched on in the previous slide, which is grading for equity. Grading for equity is a strategy introduced by Joe Feldman, and it basically helps teachers step back from more traditional and inherited grading structures and grade the student for the student. So traditional practices that we use actually tend to perpetuate disparities that have been going on for years by race, income, education, background, and even language. The problem is that if a student starts off strong with all A's, then they tend to stay strong even if they slack off toward the end of the semester. However, if a student starts off with C's, D's, and F's as they're learning the material, it's harder for this student to kind of get out of that hole, which effectively misrepresents the level of mastery that that student may ultimately exhibit.
Brandon, this is your 2-minute warning.
Thank you. So instead of grading with the traditional idea that we average a student's performance over time, alternatively, we can disregard the earlier work and grade with more interpersonal indicators and based on the student progression throughout the semester. The Wikipedia project allows for me to grade for equity rather than grade for an arbitrary number assigned to an assignment and then checking off what's right and wrong. I still have to assign an arbitrary number because I need something to grade to go by, but I get to grade based on how that particular student is progressing throughout the semester. So the advantages and support that Wiki EDU has the potential to give to equity, diversity, and inclusion far outweigh the disadvantages. My students seem to think so as well. So in conclusion, I'm going to leave you all with a quote. Well, there are several. If you go to the LibGuide, you can see several different quotes, but one in particular from a student this semester. She said, "You said something in our last Zoom meeting that hit me right in the feels. When someone says, 'Oh, I've never heard of that, what is it?' and quote, and they Google Jazz Fest, the first thing that comes up is Wikipedia. The information that you've provided is the first thing that people are going to see about that event. The importance of providing any sort of closure and closing the gap for diversity and equality and bringing cultural awareness is what you're doing right now. Wikipedia has given you a platform to assist in doing that. To me, that's what information has value means. Even though Wikipedia's platform is free to use, the information it contains is precious in its relationship to equity, diversity, and inclusion." So she clearly wasn't losing the framework or equity, diversity, and inclusion.
Brandon, that seems like a perfect time for me to tell you that your 12 minutes are up. So I want to thank you so very, very much. And again, thank you for allowing me to cut you off there. As we said earlier, all of the slides are on the LibGuide that Andrea posted a few minutes ago. So finally, I am going to introduce our presenters for our third presentation. Dr. Bryan McGeary is the Learning Design and Open Education Engagement Librarian at Penn State University. He is a Spark Open Education Leadership Fellow, an OER Specialist for Affordable Learning Pennsylvania, a graduate of the Open Education Network Certificate in OER Librarianship, and co-editor of the peer-reviewed open access journal, Pennsylvania Libraries Research and Practice. Christina Riehman-Murphy is a reference and instruction librarian at Penn State Abington College. She's the campus open liaison to Penn State Libraries and Affordable Learning PA, a Spark Open Education Leadership Fellow, and the co-program manager of a campus faculty OAER adoption grant. All right, I'm excited to hear your presentation too.
All right, thanks so much. So today we're going to start off with giving a brief overview of 2 open pedagogy projects that we both worked on with faculty. And then from there, we're going to talk a little bit about the Open Pedagogy Project Roadmap, which is an open resource that we created in order to help people actually plan open pedagogy projects. So if you would like to learn more about the projects that we're going to talk about today, I would suggest taking a look at the LibGuide for today's event. It includes a few additional readings that provide greater detail about those projects. If you could go to the first slide, Christina. So the project that I'm going to talk about is this student-authored open textbook that was created by Dr. Ashwini Ganeshan's Hispanic Linguistics class at Ohio University, which is a previous institution that I worked at. It was developed out of this need to provide a textbook that was written at a more accessible level for students. So both in terms of the linguistic content that was part of it, but also in terms of having a level of Spanish language mastery that the students had at that point. So it was created over time and is still in progress in a sort of modular fashion, starting off with a study guide assignment, which you can see a small snippet of that on the right side of the slide. And we initially collaborated on that study guide assignment, revising it in order to more explicitly incorporate elements of the ACRL framework. And so that assignment yielded kind of the basis for the initial chapters of the textbook. And then over subsequent semesters, there were additional assignments that were incorporated into it to fill out additional content. So things like practice exercises and other types of ancillary components. In addition to the students who were working in the course itself, there were also some student editors that were hired to assist with things like editing, incorporating some additional content of their own, and even recording an audio version of the book. Those students had a greater level of Spanish language mastery, and so that's why they were hired for that additional expertise. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to talk very briefly about a few lessons that were learned from this, and these kind of help to inform our development of the Open Pedagogy Project roadmap. So the first thing was that it was a very non-linear kind of process. Over the course of subsequent semesters, as I mentioned, new assignments were used to kind of fill in additional components of the textbook. Also, sometimes the editors added some things of their own as well and kind of tied up loose ends. As far as grading, one thing that was done with this particular course was to do it on a credit, no credit kind of basis that was tied to learning outcomes. And this comes out of something called specifications grading. And the idea here is to let students focus more on the process rather than worrying about grades. And part of that too is giving students opportunities for revision. And one of the other benefits of that is that by giving students the opportunity to revise, you get a little bit closer to the finished product rather than having to go back and do a lot of editing subsequent to the course. Another thing that was a big part of this was the idea of student agency. So giving students the ability to either opt in or out without there being any kind of undue impact on their grade, and for them to not have any concern about whether or not there would be any impact on their grade. Also, the students were given the ability to choose the license for the textbook, and I did a workshop with them to teach them about Creative Commons and copyright. Another thing was that this textbook includes some elements that are sort of socially justice focused, and some of that was explicitly built into the assignments, but some of it was also things that students just chose to address themselves in the portions that they authored. And then finally, as I mentioned, some students were hired to with editing and also with illustrations and things like that because of their specialized skills. We actually got a grant to help fund that. And I will turn it over to Christina.
Thanks, Brian. So the planned long-term open pedagogy project that I'm embedded in was piloted this past semester in an undergraduate English literature course taught by Dr. Marissa Nicosia, a professor of Renaissance literature at the Abington campus. And the course was redesigned to take advantage of pre and early modern literature that is, of course, in the public domain, to involve students in the development of the materials and to include diverse voices and perspectives. And it was definitely inspired by Robin DeRosa's Open Anthology of Earlier American Literature. And we ended up using all OER anthologies or open digital scholarly editions for the course text. And after a traditional 10-week seminar style class, we switched over to a final editorial project, which asks students to remix, annotate, gloss, and contextualize one of the course readings of their choice by researching and authoring an introductory header, 4 footnotes, and 2 images for, if they consented ultimately, inclusion in a future planned open access textbook on transatlantic pre-modern literature. So you can see the assignment is on the left. Here, one of the students on the road wrote a footnote for Hester Poulter's poem, An Invitation to the Country, and this is one of the images that she researched to go along with the poem. Overall, it was a very rewarding project. We decided we're going to keep going. In terms of challenges, we realized we needed to do more signposting throughout the course. The students really had a lot of questions about what they were actually going to be doing. We heard that many times, wait, what are we doing? Even though we had pointed out examples, we were using student glossed open editions. Students were initially really stuck on the format, a rubric, trying to figure out how to wrap this around their head with their traditional final essay. And they weren't very clear about writing for the public as opposed to that traditional final essay. That did create some anxiety for students, but we were very conscious and empathetic towards that as we realized it was happening, and we added in lots of additional consultation time for them to get their questions answered, created a rubric, did the things they asked. Many students were very excited about the project though as well, with a lot of curiosity and enthusiasm. A number of them expressed how they'd always wanted their name to be in a book. So that was exciting. And overall, in students' presentations and final reflection essays, some things became clear about the student impact of doing an open pedagogy project like this. Sources became important, which, hey, a librarian, woo! That's always great to hear students talk about. One student said, I realized my sources really matter, they became important. Other students, said this is the first time I've searched Library of Congress website or the British Library or a museum website. So that was great. Students absolutely expressed personal connections to the text. One student said, I will carry this author with me in a way that I've never carried any other author with me before. Another also, because they were able to choose their text, really just chose their text based on a connection to their background, and we're excited to research that. And finally, as many of you have said, writing for an authentic audience really resonated with students. And so because of that, Bryan and my collective experience on our open pedagogy project, Bryan and I realized, as we've kind of jumped in and gone through them, that people could use some assistance in developing open pedagogy project roadmaps. And so we've created an open pedagogy project roadmap to support instructors on their open pedagogy projects. I put the link in the chat to the website. The Open Pedagogy Project Roadmap is a module-based framework and workshop which assists instructors in planning, finding support for, sharing, and sustaining their projects. And it guides them through the 5 S's of open pedagogy projects, which we're calling scope, support, students, sharing, and sustaining, which again directly grew from our experience on projects like this. So I just want to introduce to you the 4 modules of the roadmap. The first is scope. And we very intentionally begin by asking instructors to think about their values and goals and their capacity before they think about the project, right? Thinking about and reflecting on the why instead of getting right to the what. And we also ask them to think about how their open pedagogy project can center diversity, equity, and inclusion. Once they've done that, we give them time to think through their capacity and their project. The second section, once they've scoped all those things, it takes instructors through identifying what support they have available to them or that they need to identify in order to have a successful open pedagogy project. And we look at everything from structural and systemic support, like a strategic plan, like promotion and tenure, will it be supported, like funding, to logistical support. Are there librarians, instructional designers, disability resources coordinators that can help you? And finally, the all-important technology support, right? What technology support the project? How are they funded? What do students need to know in order to use them?
Okay, so the next section is really about kind of refining your content and your process to focus on students. So open pedagogy is an opportunity to kind of move beyond that content mastery focus to have more of a focus on developing content agnostic knowledge practices. So this section asks you to think about making learning outcomes less focused on content, more on process, and thinking about how you'll assess those outcomes. Also being mindful of respecting the agency and labor of the students who are involved in this work. Because if we fail to do this, then open pedagogy basically turns into this transactional relationship rather than an actual collaboration. Next slide, please. So the final section really asks you to think about how you're going to share this work, both in terms of who you're going to share it with and also where you're going to share it. And then also thinking about how you're going to sustain the project. So what it kind of wraps up with is having you look back through all of the portions of the roadmap that you've completed up to that point and looking for gaps to identify kind of what your remaining needs are and thinking about what your next steps will be. Next slide, please. So on this slide, you can see there's a link or the URL for the roadmap. If you have any questions, please feel free to get in touch with us, and we thank you.
And that is perfect timing because that's our the end of your 12 minutes. So I'm gonna thank you and thank all the presenters, and I'm gonna hand it over to Andrea.
All right, thank you all so much. As a reminder, you can put questions into the chat. So we welcome you to put questions about this last presentation into the chat. And if you have questions for all panelists, you can also put those into the chat. So we'll go ahead and start. We had some questions that came in about individual projects already. So we'll start with one of those and we'll be keeping track of the questions that you continue putting into the chat. So we have a question for our first group of presenters, Yang, Ann, and Megan. One really quick, easy question, I think, was someone said, excellent presentation. Would you possibly be willing to share or to add the link to your teaching scaffolds to the LibGuide? And I'm seeing.
Yes, certainly.
Okay, awesome. So that one's easy question. And another question was, what a wonderful project. Will future classes add to these open textbooks?
For my class, yes, I think Young and Megan's approach was more of a project that was done during a semester, whereas I've approached it like a continually evolving, almost wiki-like textbook where students are adding and taking away. It's all a learning process. I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm not saying it's good yet, but the students and I are learning together, and I feel like from their evaluations and from my experiences, it's been really positive. So as you look at that textbook, just remember that we're still working on it.
Thank you. Yang or Megan, do you all have anything you want to add to that question? If not, it's fine.
Oh, yes. Just adding to what Anne says is that there's different approaches to doing an open textbook or writing project, and it can be a bit flexible. Megan and I's project is more of a kind of a specifically timed for that event that's kind of affecting the world at around that time. And it's a way of getting students to engage in it. But of course, Anne's project is more aimed at a general subject of science and technology. And it's something that students can gradually build on. So, you know, in open textbook writing can be different things. It can be producing something for an occasion, but it also can be something that's really like the completed textbooks can be used and peer reviewed by other students as a process of adding to student learning.
Great, thanks so much. We have a question for Brandon. Does grading for equity make you think grading rubrics more difficult?
No, I don't think so. Actually, I think that it might make it more equitable, in my opinion, as long as it's a good rubric that clearly delineates exactly what you're expecting from the student, and that it's completely transparent. So when you're grading, nothing in your comments seems to point toward a grade that wasn't included on the rubric. What I want to show you, I'm going to drop a link in the chat. There is a gradingforequity.org, and they have examples of equitable grading projects and rubrics and report cards and things like that that you all can take a look at. I think that if you're just using though like a template rubric that wasn't specifically designed for your assignment, then yes, it could inhibit grading for equity. But if it's something that you are designing for your specific assignment, and you're keeping in mind that all students in your class, while they may all be freshmen or all be sophomores, they aren't still they still don't enter college at the same level as one another with the same skills. So that's something to keep in mind too when you're designing your rubric and when you're grading. You can still give people similar grades on their own progression without having done the same thing.
Thanks so much, Brandon. We have another question for you, Brandon. Was it difficult to get institutional or departmental support for doing a Wiki EDU course?
The short answer is I didn't ask. I just did it. But the longer answer is that I had to first collaborate with the interdisciplinary studies department, who was interested in something that I'd been writing about, and he asked if I would design a course for their department. I designed a sample syllabi, and he said, can we make this required in my department? And I said, if we can get it approved. So basically the 16-page syllabus that my students see is also what I submitted to Courses and Curriculum, because I wanted it to be as thorough as possible so there were no questions. And the Wikipedia project was included on that syllabus, and I didn't get any questions about it. It was just approved. And then you do have to go through an application process with Wikipedia EDU itself. And you basically just talk about why your course would be a good fit for Wiki EDU. And it's maybe like a 6-page application. You talk about how long you've been teaching the course, how many students you plan to have. You give, you attach your syllabus, a little bit of an abstract about your course, and then they get back to you as to whether or not you've been accepted. And then after that, it's a lot easier to get approved every semester.
Thanks, Brandon. So as a reminder, you all can continue to put in questions into the chat. We have about 7 minutes left for this Q&A, and you can have questions for specific presenters or questions for all presenters. And Susanna also has a question for, I think it's for all presenters, but I'll turn it over to her.
Well, so this one, that's actually for Christina and Bryan first. I was wondering, I had a question about the philosophy you bring to OEP, and then how you actually use that to create the roadmap, because I think that that's also a really good example of that. So if you could speak a little bit more to that.
I guess I'll unmute. So we went back and forth on a bunch of different definitions of what does open pedagogy mean, right? And we looked through all the different readings and that. We're also in the Spark Capstone fellowship, so we've been talking about those things. And we ended up looking for the commonalities that actually relate to the Cronin, I think, definition that you all provided, right? So student involvement in knowledge creation, sort of like a collaborative environment, right? Things that have the option to be openly put out there potentially if students agree. And that's kind of where we settled on those commonalities, and renewable, right? So not just a single use assignment. And because we really wanted to be inclusive of anyone that might attend. We've run it as a workshop a couple of times of any instructors that might come to it. We didn't want people to say, oh, mine doesn't have this aspect that one person says it has to have to be an open educational practice. Because we really want to include open pedagogy. It can be challenging, but it's really rewarding as well. And so we just brought an open-mindedness to what we meant by open pedagogy and what was included in that for it. And when we ran it at Northeast Modern Language Association, and we had a diverse group of projects that came in disciplines, and people were excited to talk about what they were doing. So so that was kind of our philosophy that we bring to open pedagogy. And I've done Wiki EDU, actually, Brandon. I loved hearing about your things and felt some of the same constraints doing a Wiki EDU project. Also rewarding, but wow, I needed a lot more time to do that. So, but I think anything like that, right? Anything from doing editing an assignment or editing a Wikipedia page to writing a Wikipedia page to a textbook to whatever it may be, could be something that could work for the roadmap. So.
Thank you. We have another question that's kind of for everyone, if you've done it. So if you want to answer, please feel free and unmute. And this is a question from the chat, following up on the rubric question. Have you ever had students contribute to a rubric for an assignment or project?
I can start. There is a peer review component in Wikipedia EDU in that project. And the students do the peer review template that's in Wikipedia, but then I also ask them to design 2 supplemental questions of their own making for each peer review. It usually just ends up being the student asking, the student just critiquing something further than what the template called for. But that's okay. It just allows them to participate further in peer review and in their own grade and in their peers' grade, but not design a rubric as a whole, no, but it is recommended on Grading for Equity.
Thank you, Brandon.
We've got another question in here. Any advice about applying for or participating in the Spark OELP?
I can talk to that a little bit. One of the things to keep in mind about it, unless they've changed the application process for it, is that they ask you to say a little bit about what sort of project you might have in mind to work on it in the program. And the project that I sort of vaguely talked about in my application ended up being completely different than what we ended up doing. So just really go into it with an open mind to kind of explore possibilities, but think about ways that you can make it work for you. So in other words, think about things that you would like to or need to accomplish at your institution with open education and align it with that, because then you sort of, accomplish 2 things at once.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to put into the chat again, there was something that was in the chat before about applications for that program being accepted now and a link to that. So if people missed that in the chat, I'm just putting that in there. Another question that is for everyone is, has anyone seen examples of faculty using knowledge creation projects as a form of a lab course rather than in place of normal classwork or assignments? Oh, and we're almost at time. We got 1 minute left. So if somebody wants to tackle that question real quickly. Or maybe it's food for thought. And you also know Maya and Susanna, well, actually, I don't think we gave you our emails, but I'm going to put my email in the chat if you all have any follow-up questions. And we've got the information for all of our presenters on the LibGuide also. Susanna's put her email in the chat too. So, I'm sure that in the spirit of open educational practices that we can continue these conversations and make this a collaborative effort. So we want to thank all of our presenters so much for the time and attention that you've given to this. It's been really wonderful to learn about your projects, and we'll have a recording that'll be sent out, so you'll be able to listen to this again, share it with other people, and we hope the LibGuide can also be a useful resource that folks can share out with others. And so these resources and ideas can continue to expand. And someone is asking about sending out the chat. I think that's typically not done for privacy concerns. I'll check with ACRL to make sure. But I know that people individually, if you're in here right now, you can save the chat yourself as a file, but I will check with ACRL about what their policy is behind that. Okay, well, thank you all again so much, and I hope everyone has a wonderful evening, and particularly thanks to our presenters again.
Thank you so much.